Good afternoon to you. Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com here. Hurricane Outlook and discussion time. It is Sunday, the 8th day of August 2021, and I thought let's do something different today. So the background image there, the thumbnail, has these famous little emojis there for I don't know what to tell you. I don't know what's going to happen. It's very complicated. Instead of trying to figure out some descriptive term, I figured let's let these icons kind of lead the way that this is what's going on. It's a very complex pattern out there, and I don't know how things are going to end up, but I figure we can figure it out together and take a look at what we do know and at least get you prepared for what impacts I think are going to happen, and that's going to be down in the islands for our friends down there. That's almost a certainty, so we'll address that for sure, and then try to figure out to what extent those impacts will be and prepare from there. All right, so let's get on with it. Leaving our two little confused friends behind, we'll start with the National Hurricane Center in the eastern Pacific, where we have Tropical Storm Kevin. It will be moving on out further away from Mexico, so no worries about that one. And then another system trying to develop to the southeast of Kevin. I mean, it's just one after the other in the eastern Pacific. And I think it's going to be until the East Pacific completely shuts down that the Atlantic will come to life. You know what I'm saying? Like it's going to have to wait. The Atlantic will, for all of this to calm down, because there's a lot of rising motion still going on in the East Pac, and that air is sinking in the Atlantic, and it dries out when it does so, because sinking air, compressed air, is drier, and that's hindering some of the development. That's not the only thing going on in the Atlantic, but until this calms down completely, then it's going to stay difficult in the Atlantic Basin. The next system there trying to develop, paralleling the Mexican coast, but again, it should stay enough offshore so that you all can avoid any problems from that. Meanwhile, in the Atlantic, here's our twin areas. This one is Invest Area 94, and this one is Invest Area 93. 92 that was out here is gone, so they've dropped it. So we have a couple of systems to watch to see how they evolve and where they end up, how strong they'll be, what impacts they'll have. And it is very, very complex. As I showed you yesterday, we've got this monsoon trough pattern sitting out here in the Atlantic, and we're going to show you this more in detail in a moment. First, there's Kevin. Here's the other energy that's coming together. And again, that's a lot of upward motion, a lot of thunderstorm activity bubbling up in the atmosphere. And so the air is rising pretty efficiently all throughout this area, and then it sinks over on this side. This is an oversimplification of it, and it kind of creates some wind shear, and that sinking air dries out, that kind of thing. And it goes against development in the Atlantic. These areas are just too close together, even though they're thousands of miles apart. It does matter that the East Pacific is still so busy. All right, shifting to the east a little bit, that complex pattern still sitting out here overall. And boy, look at that one getting ready to come off Africa. I mean, we're getting there. It's only August 8th, and we knew this was coming. The models were showing this months ago with the upward motion in the Atlantic eventually getting established out here over Africa and then eventually into the Indian Ocean and just spitting out these robust tropical waves. What I think we didn't count on was this monsoon trough kind of wiggling its way through here. And again, I talked about it yesterday. Think of it just as like an assembly line, potentially for energy. The air is coming together there, and there's lower pressure. It's just this convergence area, a trough of lower pressure, and it's horizontal going through the atmosphere instead of one of these vertical latitudinal troughs. This one's more, well, a longitudinal trough. That's what I meant to say. So instead of these big troughs that dip down in the wintertime that go down the longitudes, if you will, we call those longitudinal. This one's more latitudinal. It's east to west or west to east, whatever. And so being that it's over the tropics, sometimes you get systems that will develop out of it, and they tend to be very large when they do, if they can be by themselves. The problem here is you've got this monsoon trough, and then embedded in it all these little tropical waves. Well, fairly little compared to the enormous size of that trough out there. And so everything's competing with each other. Again, that's the problem, which is good, because we don't have any big raging hurricanes coming out of it, but it's bad in that when you delay development in this part of the Atlantic, it's easier to get stuff farther to the west where we live. So you say, well, it's struggling, it's going to be a rough season for stuff to develop, nothing's going to happen. And I would argue against that this is not necessarily a good sign, because if stuff's developing east, then it tends to recurve more often than not. And not to mention, it's not just the United States we're talking about. We have people that live down here: Barbados, Trinidad, Tobago, up through Guadeloupe, and the British U.S. Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, the Greater Antilles. They are all in the line of fire from anything that comes out of the deep tropics here. So if you get it to develop out here and then maybe take a hike out into the open Atlantic, that's a good thing. Yay, all right. But if they struggle and then they start to come to life here and they cruise through the Caribbean, even if they still recurve, which they could do, you still have impacts down here. And it doesn't take a hurricane to bring you significant problems. I'm going to emphasize that for the rest of my career, all right? Rain is your number one enemy. And then it's wind, and storm surges in there too, depending on the intensity. But from any tropical entity out here, rain is your number one hazard. So let's zoom in and take a look. This is 94L, and there's 93 behind it. So this is 93, and this one is 94. And you can see there's pretty good vorticity or spin with both systems, but they're pretty close to each other overall, and thus they compete with each other. And you can also see there's definitely dry air in here. How can you tell? Well, you don't have very good banding of thunderstorms. The thunderstorms are kind of blowing up in these clusters. Maybe a semblance of banding right there, but that's stretching it a piece. Maybe a band right there. So there's just not enough juice in the mid-levels of the atmosphere. Probably the humidity values, I'm guessing, are in the 50-60% range at best. And so that's limiting the thunderstorm activity. So it comes up and it goes down, and you don't get these bands developing that constantly feed any low-level circulation that's trying to develop in here. You've got to have those bands that continually reinforce the heat engine. These pop-ups of little hot towers, as we call them, these convective bursts, that's a long process. And the longer it takes, it can run into drier air or more shear, because once these develop, they can start sort of fending that off if they're large enough. So interesting to see this on the satellite. There's a lot of meteorology going on here to kind of understand what's happening. Definitely rotation with both of these systems, and they're going to be headed towards the islands. You've got this front leading area of moisture that's already come through. Here's Barbados, here's Guadeloupe up here, and this is going to be heading in that general direction. All of this, and it'll probably amplify a little bit more. So all of that lightning that you see, those yellow speckles, this will be headed your way. Heavy rain, gusty winds, that can capsize small boats. The heavy rain can cause mudslides and flash floods. And then other issues, if it gets a little bit stronger and a little bit more organized, then those particular effects get amplified further. All right, and we'll talk about that more in detail in a moment as well when we look at the modeling. So the vorticity signature, here's Kevin, here's the next system in the Pacific, 94L, 93L, the remnants of 92L, and then there's more energy still sitting over Africa. This, by the way, was an interesting little doodad, kind of non-tropical, but over fairly warm water. Came off the east coast from that trough that came through. Maybe if it was in September, it could have been one of those quick-fused, named storms. As it was, it brought some gusty winds and heavy rain, that kind of thing, storminess to the mid-Atlantic, just pointing it out. But yeah, these are the systems here that we have to watch, mainly these two. And all that orange that you see in there represents the vorticity, the spin in the atmosphere, that energy there. And where is it headed? It's headed in this direction. Who lives there? You do. Some of you. Not everybody, but people live there, all right? So let's focus on what could be happening with that going forward. This is a neat tool, the Total Precipitable Water, a product from the this particular animation from the University of Wisconsin. Trying to speed it up there. And this is very helpful. You can see the leading surge of moisture out ahead of everything right there. There's 94, 93 sitting in here. This is what was 92. More moisture off of Africa. Dry air overall, not a very big issue. Broadly speaking, it's pretty moist out there. But there's enough dry air in the vicinity of these two waves or impulses. All that lighter color, the greenish and the bluish. Yep, that's the dry air, pretty close to that system. So it's going to have to try to tap into deep moisture feeds coming down from, off the Amazon, and feed itself, because to the north you do have this dry air pocket. So there are some impediments. That being said, I think this will bring some impacts to the islands, and that leads me to looking at the guidance, which is somewhat helpful, especially in the short term, the next 2 to 3 days perhaps. Beyond that time, as I showed you here, I don't know. So let's see. This is the euro from 12Z today, 850 millibar. I'm sorry, it's the GFS. My fault. I'm going to show you the GFS first and then the euro. Initialized 8 a.m. Eastern time this morning. That's what 12Z is, at least this time of year. And here are the impulses that we're watching. All right, I'll outline them for you. There's 93, or sorry, 90. Yeah, that's 93. There's 94 and former 92. Nice big area of subtropical high pressure. And there's that little impulse right there off the mid-Atlantic states for what it's worth. So let's put this into motion and see what happens. You notice almost immediately that front-running system there, 94L, begins to sort of amplify, if you will. It gets a little bit more robust. And by about 48 hours, Tuesday morning, it is moving through the vicinity of the Northeast Caribbean Sea. And then it goes over Puerto Rico, comes up to the eastern side of Hispaniola, and gets tangled up down there perhaps, moving into the Southeast Bahamas. This is 4 days out, so this is Thursday morning. And then it kind of just goes away, and there's all this energy sitting down here, all through here. That's where it is. And you see these little ripples in the height field. Those are other tropical waves, but none of them show any really interest, or signs that we would be interested in them just looking at this. Doesn't look like that. That's a hurricane in the model, almost certainly in the Pacific. So that's what we would be looking for. Does this look like that? No. Neither does this, neither does this. And does this mean this is what's going to happen verbatim? Of course not. The numeric models are notorious for not seeing genesis, the development of these things, and it's constantly evolving. But what is interesting, this is day 5. If we just run it out a couple more days, the front runner gets into the near the Florida Straits, and then it just kind of goes away and then tries to pop up again there off the southeast coast by about days 7 and 8. So that's an interesting clue that we need to watch for down the road. Okay, that's kind of a key to the game. All right, it's coming in, and then it starts to get amplified. What if it does that a couple of days earlier? These are some clues we need to watch for later. So we're going to come back to this in just a moment. I'm going to zoom in and show you what's going on down on the islands, because that's who's going to see this first. Now let's contrast this with the euro, the ECMWF. Same run, 12Z today, same parameter of the atmosphere, 850 millibars. There's 94, there's 93, 92, Eastern Pacific action. This is every 24 hours that we get from the Tropical Tidbit site. So here's Monday morning, Tuesday morning, and this is, in one respect, good in that at least the GFS and the euro both show consistency. That's the good part. There's not this, well, one has it, the other doesn't. So there's the euro showing a very similar scenario for Tuesday morning for the islands. All right, and so that takes me over here real quick to the GFS. Let's move this out to 48 hours, and there it is. So the euro and the GFS both show a fairly intact, maybe a closed low. That could be a depression, maybe. But what this is this telling me there's some energy moving through there. So you're going to have heavy rain, Guadeloupe, the islands, St. Bart, Anguilla, all the way over to the U.S. British Virgin Islands and eventually Puerto Rico. This whole mess going to move through your area. So you're going to have impacts. Heavy rain, gusty winds, flash flooding, maybe power outages. Puerto Rico is still very susceptible to power outages. So this is coming up in the Monday, Tuesday time frame. Let's just back it up. It approaches Monday afternoon, Monday evening, pretty close to over to Guadeloupe and Antigua, and then moving through the Northeast Caribbean, and then boom, right over Puerto Rico. So this could be a major flood problem for Puerto Rico. Forget, it's not just wind. And then it moves on through, just going out in time on the GFS, ending up in the southeast parts of the Florida Straits and beyond at about day 7. That's where we'll stop, and we'll see what happens. All right, so let's go back to the euro. 72 hours over Hispaniola, 96, 120. And the same thing, by day 7, very similar to the GFS, tries to amplify it again off the coast of Florida. Then you got another system there, another one there, and another one there. So the busyness, and we're only to the mid part of August, is definitely upon us. But the end game, like what's going to happen, I honestly don't know. I mean, if I did, I would tell you. I'm not even going to speculate because this is so complex. And it's interesting, too, because, and I said this yesterday, the small nature of what we're seeing in the modeling there. These are very small features right now. They can intensify very quickly, and the resolution of the global models may not see these smaller systems as easily. That's one thing. It's the way that the resolution is, how they resolve different grids of the ocean and the atmosphere. It's a complex thing. So the higher resolution models, when they start running those, especially when and if we get a closed circulation, a depression, or stronger, the HWRF, especially the hurricane model, Hurricane Weather Research Forecast model, that is a high-resolution model. Very powerful and very expensive to run, and it is specific for tropical cyclones. The global models is kind of like your big picture. It does a pretty good job, but those high-resolution models, especially the HWRF, is what we're going to need to use eventually once we get something that's more definable in that model field. It needs to be able to sort of lock on and then go with it, because sometimes the HWRF will take a small thunderstorm and blow it up into a Cat 4 hurricane. So there's that fine line there of when the HWRF becomes valuable, and it's usually once we have something that's developed already. So, it's going to be an interesting few days. I think my best advice, especially for you all in the Caribbean, from Barbados and areas west of there, St. Vincent, the Grenadines, and then Grenada, points north and west through the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico, you got to be getting ready for impacts, whatever that may mean. Gusty winds, like I said, very heavy rainfall. Prepare for that because that's, a near certainty, as weather can allow. Real quick, want to let you know I've got a few of these left. I hand-delivered one to a gentleman that bought it over in Sierra Vista. I happened to be going to Arizona, so I said, hey, I'll just bring it with me. It's our paper hurricane tracking map, and this is the second printing I've done for this season. The first printing sold out, so I printed up about 50 more, and there's about a dozen left. If you want to get one, I'll put the link in the description of today's video. It's beautiful. It's 18 by 24. Not too late to get yours. You'll have plenty more to track, and you can order it through PayPal. I can't hand deliver it to you unless you live in Wilmington, and then maybe I could. This guy was in Arizona, but be glad to send it to you, and it helps to fund what we do, and you get something in return that nobody else offers, a big poster-size, full Atlantic Basin hurricane tracking chart, the old-school paper way of doing it. Again, I'll put the link to that in the description. All right, so that is about it from me for today. A lot going on, a lot to keep track of, and we'll see how it all works out together, all right? As always, thanks for tuning in. Don't forget, real quick, too, that I've got the podcast in the mornings called Hurricane Season, the podcast, available through Spotify and Apple Podcasts. You find it there. Just search for Hurricane Season, the podcast, and you'll see our logo, very easy to find, and you'll know that's the one. You can subscribe to it, and I do a little short briefing, kind of outlining what I'm going to talk about the day ahead, and then I do this video that goes into detail later that day. That's how it works. Now I can sign off. Have a great rest of your Sunday. I am Mark Sudduth. Thanks for watching. We'll do it again starting tomorrow.